Welcome back to the New Quantum Era, the podcast about the people, ideas, and technologies shaping our quantum future. I'm your host, Sebastian Hassinger. Today, we're exploring the intersection of high-performance computing and quantum science with someone who's been at the forefront of both. My guest is Bert de Jong, director of the Quantum Systems Accelerator at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory and a longtime leader in computational chemistry and scientific computing. Over nearly 3 decades in the U.S. National Lab system, Bert has seen and helped drive the evolution from classical exascale computing to today's race for quantum advantage. We'll talk about the shift that brought him into quantum research, the role national labs play in the U.S. National Quantum Initiative, and why QSA has bet on advancing multiple hardware modalities, superconducting qubits, trapped ions, and neutral atoms in parallel. Bert shares his perspective on what it'll take to move from prototypes to systems that deliver real scientific advantage, why error-corrected devices with 100 logical qubits may be closer than we think, and how collaboration between scientists, engineers, and industry partners will shape the next 5 years. If you've ever wondered how the quantum ecosystem moves from breakthrough experiments to practical technologies, and what the roadmap looks like from the National Lab vantage point, this conversation will give you a clear and exciting picture. Let's dive in.
Hey, Bert. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Sebastian. Nice to meet you.
So you are a director of a national quantum center, and you've got a sort of interesting background. So I really want to hear about the NQI Center, but can you start by just giving us a little bit of a background on how you got to where you are?
Also, I've been in the National Lab system now for coming up 27 years. Spent time at Pacific Northwest National Lab and for half of my career, and now my second half has been at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. So I'm a computational chemist by training. My real driver underneath everything is I want to solve scientific problems. And so the early part of my career, I focused a lot on HPC. I needed to run bigger and bigger simulations. So I was running large computational chemistry simulations, developing codes that would scale on exascale platforms to actually be able to do these simulations. So when I came to Berkeley, I started to think a little bit more broadly. It's like, okay, classical computing, how much further can that scale? And we have to solve problems that are going to be bigger and bigger. So then I started to look at alternative technologies. So quantum computing really was very nascent at that point, as something that could be a pathway to provide more computational power than classical computers. And AI was there at the same time too. So
What year would that have been?
that would have been 2014-ish, so
Okay.
10 years ago.
Okay.
Yes. So I started to work more heavily in quantum at that point in time. It's like, can I use a quantum computer to solve real scientific problems? What are the problems to making that happen? How can I make a quantum computer do better things? So started to work a lot on algorithms, understanding the software that is needed to actually run on these systems, and actually figuring out where the challenges are. The noise, can we actually find ways to correct some of these challenges? So it really has been, I'm a tool builder at heart too. I want to solve science problems, but I realize I need to build the tools. And to me, HPC, quantum, and AI are tools, and we need to advance them. So for the last,
were you approaching chemistry from a computational perspective right from the beginning of your career?
Yes.
Yeah,
actually,
that's pretty rare, isn't it? I mean, there's sort of a dividing line between the lab chemists and the computational chemists?
Yeah, so I perceive what I do as a virtual experiment. But to give you a little bit more of a tidbit, even before I started to get my degrees in physical chemistry, computational chemistry, I actually started with a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering. So I had a very practical view of things, but I didn't like the rule of thumb. And that's why I wanted to get more and more into understanding the fundamentals And then if you become a computational chemist, you pretty much are a non-card carrying physicist because you use quantum mechanics to do these things. So
Right.
effectively, my life has been quantum mechanics.
Right.
And naturally, when you start thinking about what tools could be doing quantum chemistry the best, it would be a tool that is by nature
Right.
quantum. It's
Right.
really
Falls
what
into,
Feynman said, yes.
yeah, exactly what I was going to say. It falls into that category, right? If you want to simulate nature, nature's not classical, so you need a quantum computer.
Exactly.
That's that makes perfect sense, and obviously the application of classical computing and performance computing and in National Labs the Exascale supercomputers, you would have sort of a front row seat on the performance challenges, right? The scaling issues around the size of the system that you can simulate, and then the trade-offs of the approximations, the sort of the scaling back of the system that you're trying to simulate to try to make it fit into something as small as an exascale classical computer.
Well, I do not underestimate the exascale computers we have at Oak Ridge and Argonne. We spent a lot of time, I would say 7 years at Berkeley and at all the national labs to really develop the codes and the systems to be able to use them to the max of our ability. That was done through the exascale computing program that was funded out of DOE for a long period of time. It has been a very productive environment, but again, the chips are getting smaller and smaller. We're running it there also into almost the quantum nature of
Right.
these chips. And so there is a question of what's next. And
Yeah.
that's when I started to think about what's next. Quantum came as a pathway. And so I started to pivot a lot more
Right.
to quantum 10 years ago.
Yeah, and so the National Quantum Initiative, I think, was passed in 2017 or 2018, and it established through the DOE and the NSF a series of centers, National Quantum Initiative centers, which are all, I think, anchored in national labs. There's sort of a national lab at the center of each of those centers. Lawrence Berkeley Lab was I think there's QSA is the NQI center, right? The
Yes.
Quantum Systems Accelerator. So did you join the QSA right when it was formed?
I had a small role that it was primarily led by Irfan Siddiqui at that point in
Right.
time. Um, and over the last couple of years, as leadership changed, there was an opportunity for me to take the deputy role. So 2 years ago, so I was a deputy for a year, and then at that point, the director that was out of Sandia left to go to IARPA, and I
Okay.
was appointed the director. So that's about, I've been doing this role for a little bit over a year now, which
Well,
has been a very,
congratulations. It's exciting.
it has been a very exciting time because, again, I'm a computational person and 3/4 of our center is experimental. And it's actually fascinating to learn how these technologies are advancing, the research that is being done. It has been a very exciting and rewarding, I would say, 2 years, because as a deputy, I already had
Yeah,
to
of
learn
course.
a lot of new insights.
Yeah. You were whatever being trained for the director role, I guess, in deputy. So the QSA is, how does the focus area or areas of the QSA sort of differentiate it from the other NQI centers? What do you see as its role in the overall NQI?
So the QSA has taken a very interesting approach early on. And I would say most of the centers focused on a specific technology or a specific direction. One of the things that the Quantum System Accelerator did from the outset is say, we're trying to not choose a lane. So that we start with superconducting, trapped ions, and neutral atoms, because those are, at that point in time, again, we talk about 2021, those are the three technologies that have the highest potential to deliver a technology that could be used by the Department of Energy to solve real scientific problems. And so the research scope has been literally in that, moving those three fields forward. What you then quickly see is there is also a lot of relationships between the different technology areas. For example, the trapped ions and neutral atoms have very similar challenges. A lot of research ended up being focused in, for example, integrated photonics to miniaturize, to actually avoid taking all the tools that the telecom community is using and creating bottlenecks. But the technologies were able to move forward very quickly. So the neutral atoms, for example, is a great story within the quantum system accelerator. I would say if you look at 2021, superconducting was ahead, trapped ions was a little bit behind, and neutral atoms were still in a very nascent state. Literally, over the course of the center so far, we have delivered a system that is 256 qubits, 256 atoms, do both in analog and digital operations, and be able to do real science with them. The cool part is that a lot of the technologies that have come out of that, then through a very close partnership between the neutral atoms team and a company like Quera, allowed them to actually develop as a I would say, one of the leading companies right now.
Absolutely. I mean, everybody's looking forward to their next system. I think it's going to be named Gemini. That's the name I've heard tossed around. And I mean, based on the work from Misha Lukin, who's leads the neutral atom thrust for the QSA, right?
Yes,
That
correct.
whole right. So he's also co-founder of Qera. The expectation is that Gemini device is going to have something like 48 logical qubits that have some degree of error correction, which is really exciting because that's coming out of the gate with several dozen logical qubits, which the general consensus is if we get to 50 logical qubits and they're all capable of being interconnected with one another, that's a system that's not classically simulatable in any. It's kind of extraordinary to see that kind of enormous leap forward as long as the Gemini system can actually do that. I think it's very exciting. It's very exciting for sort of this, the next phase of the NQI and of the QSA that we're at that beginnings of that logical qubit era.
I would say not just for the NQIs, but also for the whole quantum ecosystem.
Yeah.
And that's a big challenge, a big change we've seen in the last couple of years, right? We see the first demonstrations of logical qubits that can at least break even or slightly do better. And that is something we could not have really focused on 5 years ago because the systems were not of a scale that we could even consider that. And in addition, there's a lot of theoretical computer science development and just fundamental quantum mechanics development that has happened to better understand how we can use and work with error codes. And so, so we're currently in a recompete situation. If we get another 5 years, error correction is going to be a much bigger scope within the center, since we will be able to scale up our systems both in the neutral atoms, trapped ions, and superconducting qubits.
Right.
We will be using different ways of error correction at that point in time. But still.
I was going to say, there's been that sort of progress towards error correction and logical qubits across all the modalities that you listed off. So do you think the second phase of the QSA would continue that focus across all three modalities?
Yes, so we will continue with all the three modalities. We've taken slightly different approaches to scale. Neutral atoms is, as you kind of pointed out with what Quera is thinking about, we have a similar roadmap, relatively speaking, for the neutral atoms. Trapped ions, we are looking at not just increasing the number of qubits, but also figuring out how we can take more advantage of the degrees of freedom that might be available in the system. Instead of doing a 2 to the n, do 4 or 5, 6 to the n type simulations using different degrees of freedom. That allows us to scale too.
You mean more than just two levels in the system? So sort of QDIS?
No. So the other thing that we already demonstrated as something we already have done as early demonstrations in the current quantum system accelerator period is actually demonstrating that we could use both the fermionic and bosonic degrees of freedom at the same time.
Got it.
So combination of those can get us a much bigger computational space without doing huge numbers of ions.
Right. That's interesting. And that's because of the fine-grained control within the ions, the electron spins, right? Yeah. That's really interesting. Is that similar in some sense, conceptually, at least to what's happening as superconducting with things like cat qubits and dual rail, where there's bosonic modes as well?
I think it's a little different in how we are actually going to complement those 2 degrees of freedom. I would say in the superconducting qubit side, what you see is actually people are using those bosonic degrees of freedom, those CAD codes, or the GKP state code that we have done actually hard coded into a qubit now to actually deal with error correction more than adding more degrees of freedom.
Okay.
That's a different focus, is
I see.
getting more computational space over getting better computational space, which is the challenge with superconducting qubits.
It's interesting. I mean, the DOE National Labs have such a strong focus on science. It feels like you're uniquely positioned to contribute to this stage of quantum computing because there's so much scientific knowledge that's required to even approach how to build these systems and control these systems. It's really way more science than engineering at this stage. Do you think that's accurate still, that we're sort of in this fundamental science phase, or it's playing more a stronger role than it does in something like a mature technology like classical computing?
I would say we have there's still major scientific questions on how we can build better quantum systems. But what I would say is we see also a big trend towards engineering challenges, right? So we can make qubit. So let's say we have trapped ions. We want to be able to control the laser light better. If we do that with modulators and other things, it's just large scale, physically large scale to do that. So integrated photonics is a pathway to do this. So integrated photonics, sure, there is some science to it, but it's a lot of engineering challenge. How can we actually fabricate these kind of things and integrate them into chips?
Right.
I would say superconducting, it's an engineering challenge by now to get higher fidelity. How do you get more perfect materials? How do you get more perfect Josephson junctions? How do you do things like dual rail or CAD qubits in a more accurate way, a more perfect way, so you can get better qubits and be able to run simulations on them with higher accuracy? And that has to all be then combined with the error correction story, of course, and the science.
Right.
What the labs to me bring, one of the aspects the labs bring is they understand the DOE science mission and know what the problems are that have to be solved. They also have a lot of facilities to do the engineering part. For example, the Quantum System Accelerator is a partnership between Berkeley Lab and Sandia Lab. So Sandia has a lot of fab facilities. So they make trapped ions. They actually build that trapped ions on space. They actually fabricate those integrated photonic systems.
We had Dan Stick on the podcast a year or so ago. Talking about the big enchilada.
Exactly. So the big enchilada is one of the products that come out of the Quantum System Accelerator. But so those kind of capabilities. So Berkeley Lab has entities like the Molecular Foundry, the Advanced Light Source, that can actually probe, let's say, a superconducting qubit to the molecular scale to see where the errors are coming from. And we have actually in the Molecular Foundry tools to actually make chips and really understand the process of making chips. Those are engineering challenges. We have also a very large team focused on controls. All of these light sources and also the capabilities that we build for DOE at large, there is a lot of controls issues there. So we have a team that has pretty much built their own open source superconducting qubit control system that works actually with trapped ions too. That's called Cubic.
Cubic, right.
That comes out of the Quantum System Accelerator too. So there is, to me, that is an engineering problem. So there is a lot of engineering problems that are coming up right now, while we're still continuing to do some of the fundamental research to just build better.
Yeah.
I think it's a combination of the two, and this is what national labs are exactly good at.
Well, and you mentioned, sort of bringing that end user perspective to the use cases that these devices, as they start to match and surpass the capabilities of classical systems, the first use cases they're going to be applied to will be scientific computing, things like chemistry, putting your chemistry hat back on. You really have the most qualified sort of user base in the United States in the national labs and the affiliated universities for driving those initial applications of this emerging technology. Do you sort of have an instinctive sense of where that first impact might be, where we carry out an experiment where we clearly go, well, there's no way we could have done that classically? Yeah, I mean, do you have a perspective on that?
Definitely. So even though I'm a computational chemist, early on when I started to work in the quantum computing, I partnered with high-energy physics and nuclear physics. Turns out that the problems they have, sure, they have slightly different ideas and energy scales, but the fundamentals on how to solve these problems are not that different. So between the three areas, high-energy physics, nuclear physics, and chemistry and materials is another area that is going to be important. We will be able, and I honestly believe that within the next 5 years, we're going to run simulations that will be a challenge on the classical computers. And the fun part for us is people say, well, yeah, we need fully fault tolerant quantum computers, but that's going to be 10 years out. We don't need that. And that's the key part. But my instinct says that if we can get to a quantum computer that is by order 100 logical qubits that have a fidelity of 10 to the minus 7, knowing where our algorithms are and where we see the number of operations are going to be, we can get reasonable results, reasonable reliable results out of a quantum computer for high-energy physics, nuclear physics, chemistry and materials, and be able to deliver a quantum scientific advantage.
Right.
Is it the quantum advantage? I don't like that word.
I
talk about the scientific advantage of using quantum computers to solve real scientific problems.
Right. Well, it's when it can produce, as a tool, it can produce results that would be very, very difficult, if not impossible, to do by other means. Right. That's to me, that's the benchmark.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the exact benchmark. And if you look at it, when you look at most of the fields, they are making approximations so they can make it fit on a classical computer.
Right.
And what we know is that certain degrees of freedom that we do not include in our classical simulations are critical. And quantum computers tend to be more natural to solve some of these problems too.
Right. So then the first sort of advantage will be that you're not having to make those trade-offs that reduce the accuracy of your final results. You'll end up with a more realistic simulation of the system that you're trying to simulate. That's really interesting. Yes. That's really interesting. And you mentioned, you sort of said that you're a tool maker. When you think about these progress towards these early use cases, are you also thinking how to sort of bridge the gap between the experimental physicists, the systems engineering, the super specific domain expertise that goes into algorithm design, and then making tools that somebody who's a computational chemist or a material scientist can use without having all of that background in quantum computing?
So I can now put on my other hat. So my earlier, so before I started to lead the Quantum System Accelerator, and I still continue to, I started to lead other smaller centers that are focused on quantum software, quantum compilers, and quantum algorithms. So most of my funding has been in that realm. So we actually developed a end-to-end software stack in one of the programs we called 8QC. And now we have a new one that started, that's about a year old now, that is called MachQ, so the speed of quantum. And so we're really building critical components that could easily plug into the software stacks that are being developed by the commercial entities or open source software stacks. So we went away from building a whole end-to-end stack, but rather building the critical missing capabilities. And one of those is a fully open source quantum compiler. We call it Biscuit, BQSKIT. Slightly different than the biscuit you would eat.
Yeah.
So that one actually we have been developing for the last 8 years or so. That it can now handle up to 1,000 qubits without too much issue. But Now the big transition again, what we've seen again, but the error correction. So our next phase is to actually build that compiler out so that it can actually build you fully logical
Right. Well, and
quantum
I've been thinking
circuits.
about that. That's going to be quite a challenge for compilers because the definition of what a logical qubit is and how to do logical operations is going to be extremely different from one vendor to another, at least in this early stage, right?
Yes. And that
Yeah.
we encountered that same problem when we were building our compiler from scratch, because even at that point, 6, 7 years ago, there was also not a lot of consensus of what it would look like to run on a quantum computer. So we've been dealing with this forever, and that's okay. That's
Yeah.
part of the fun.
Totally.
If we in the classical computing world, it's now all pretty much, well, diverged again, but it became all x86.
Right.
So it's pretty standard sets of building the tools. Now all of a sudden, the community in the last 5, 10 years has moved to GPUs or FPGAs and all those other techniques. So we see again a diversity and a more challenging environment even for compilers there. So, but that's okay. You bring in the computer scientists that know what they're talking about, and that's the one big thing of any of the projects that I lead and any of the teams that I lead is the key part is diversity and teamwork. So my programs generally have computer scientists, applied mathematicians, and domain scientists working closely together to really move either the software stack or the technology forward to get to a point where we can actually deliver a scientific advantage or a scientific capability to the Department of Energy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess the NQI even has, the national labs have a long history of collaboration across the academic research world, but the NQI even sort of sharpened the focus on industrial collaboration as well. There's industrial members of, I think, all of the NQI centers, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think that's going to even become more and more important as we see now a real growth in these companies. They are starting to produce systems, sell systems, but most of them are still VC funded. So their roadmap is pretty short. That's 2, 3 years, and they need to deliver. And this is an opportunity I feel for the National Quantum Initiative centers is to not just think 2, 3 years, but look at what's next. So, what is beyond these 2, 3 years that needs either scientific or engineering development to a point that we pretty much can hopefully de-risk some of these companies' development long-term roadmaps going forward. And I come back to that point. This is why the whole integrated photonics that was done at QSA has been interesting, because going forward, once we start for another 5 years, we have Quera, Quantidium, INQ, Atom. They're all very interested in getting their hands on that kind of a technology because it's
That's
kind
a
of
great story.
just beyond the roadmap that they have, but they know they need to get there.
Right. And that is the classic role of public sector funded science and research, right? I mean,
Exactly.
it's that over the horizon kind of investment of resources that's very difficult to do in the private sector for obvious reasons. So yeah, that's really fascinating. So if you think about that all of the complexity of the areas that the QSA is focusing on, those multiple modalities, the phase we're going into with error correction and logical qubits starting to emerge, and this cross collaboration between private sector, public sector, academia. What do you see? There's as you said, the recompete phase has started. It's part of the reauthorization of the NQI that everyone's hoping happens soon. What do you sort of hope is sort of the, 5 years from now, you're looking back at what you've accomplished at QSA, whether sort of the top 3 kind of bullets in your mind of what you want to be able to rattle off and point to?
Are you talking about what we 5 years from now, what we want to have accomplished? My goal,
a little
honestly, would be.
Bert.
I'm not prognostic. We have a very clear vision, and that is we will deliver quantum technologies that are about 100 qubits. They will be prototypes, right? They will not be full-fledged industrial systems. Our target is to deliver prototypes that are about 100 logical qubits at 10 to the minus 7 accuracy.
Amazing.
And using those to then actually start to do these early scientific demonstrations that could have a path to scientific advantage.
That's fantastic.
That's the goal, and that's an extremely, and I understand that's a very ambitious goal, but we need to get there. We have had a long time where it's another 5 years, another 10 years. I think the time is now that 5 years is actually not a far-fetched horizon. It's a realistic 5-year horizon.
Yeah. It's funny how there is a qualitative difference between 5 years from now when it's sort of a wild guess versus 5 years from now, but I'm really confident it actually is 5 years.
And I think industry sees that too. And
I agree.
That's the exciting part.
You look at all the roadmaps and they're all in the 5-year horizon. They're delivering a number of logical qubits that would be, again, very difficult, if not impossible to simulate. So, yeah, it's an exciting time. So this is fantastic, Bert. I really appreciate your time. I think the QSA has done amazing work over the last 5 years, and I'm very much looking forward to the next 5.
So do I. If you look at the partners that we have, and our mix is really, we have a lot of universities, leaders in the universities that are doing the fundamental science connected to the kind of the engineering side of the labs and the application side. It has been a fantastic 5 years already. And I think another 5 years, we really can put quantum on the map, so to speak, for the Department of Energy.
Great. Well, thanks so much for your time, Bert. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the podcast, a production of the New Quantum Era, hosted by me, Sebastian Hassinger, with theme music by OCH. You can find past episodes on www.newquantumera.com or on Blue Sky at newquantumera.com. If you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe and tell your quantum curious friends to give it a listen.